Hey everyone, ready to take a deep dive into mental health stigma? We're going beyond just the surface level today.
Yeah,
Really going to explore how stigma actually works, its sneaky disguises,
yeah,
and most importantly, how we can fight back.
absolutely.
We've got two great sources lined up for this deep dive
Okay.
podcast episodes, tackling both the general stigma surrounding mental health and the very tricky topic of high-functioning depression.
It's a big one.
Yeah,
Yeah, it goes so much deeper than just calling someone crazy or something like
it's
that.
much more subtle.
Insidious.
Yeah, and it sneaks into our judgments, our
Yeah.
assumptions, and even,
Even our self-perception,
yeah,
which is crazy.
it really is. So it makes me wonder, how did we even get here?
Well, if you think back to ancient times,
Okay.
mental illness was seen as
Oh, God.
demonic possession or divine punishment.
Yeah, that's it.
Really heavy
That's
stuff.
simple.
But even as science, started to advance and we
Right.
learned more,
Right.
that stigma morphed into this idea of mental illness as weakness, as a flaw.
Yeah.
And Dr. Patrick Corrigan, who's a leading voice in this field, he says,
Okay.
stigma is more than just ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a deeply ingrained bias.
Yeah.
So it's not just about lacking knowledge.
Right.
It's about these deep-rooted attitudes
Okay.
that are so hard to shake.
It's almost like we've inherited these biases without even realizing it.
Absolutely. And then you layer on top of that
Yeah.
all this pressure to be successful and happy all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And suddenly admitting that you're struggling becomes even harder.
Way harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that leads us to high-functioning depression,
Exactly.
where someone appears to be totally fine on the outside,
Mhm.
crushing their goals,
Always smiling,
always smiling.
but
Yeah.
inside,
Right.
they're battling like a silent storm.
Wow.
Dr. Margaret Rutherford calls this
Okay.
perfectly hidden depression.
Wow. I like that.
And she describes it as people who smile on the outside, but are quietly breaking on the inside.
That's so powerful and heartbreaking at the same time.
It is,
It really makes you realize just how much people might be hiding.
for sure.
How do we spot it?
Yeah.
What are some of the subtle signs that someone might be struggling with this high-functioning depression?
One of the biggest ones is constant exhaustion.
Okay.
And we're not just talking about being tired. It's this deep, persistent fatigue
Oh, wow.
that sleep just doesn't seem to fix.
Yeah.
Dr. Robert Sapolsky, a neuroscientist who has studied stress for decades, he found that chronic stress can actually shrink the hippocampus,
Oh, God.
which is the part of your brain that is vital for memory.
Wow. So it's not just a matter of toughing it out.
No, it's not.
There are like real biological consequences.
Real biological consequences.
Boy, that's terrifying.
Yeah, and that's why understanding these less obvious signs is so important.
Absolutely. Beyond exhaustion,
Mhm.
what else should we be looking for?
Another sneaky one is perfectionism.
Okay.
Now, that might sound like a positive trait on the surface.
Yeah.
But when it's driven by this fear of failure
Mhm.
or judgment,
Yeah.
it becomes like a defense mechanism.
Interesting.
Dr. Brene Brown, who researches shame and vulnerability, she says perfectionism is not the same as striving to be your best.
Okay.
It's the belief that if we do things perfectly, we can avoid the pain of blame,
Ah.
judgment, and shame.
Yeah.
So it becomes less about achievement and more about control and hiding your true self.
It's like that friend who's always overachieving but
Yeah.
never seems to enjoy it.
Exactly.
Almost like they're afraid to let their guard down. Is
That's
that
it.
what you mean?
You got it.
Okay.
That inability to truly experience joy,
Oh, wow.
that's another hallmark of high-functioning depression.
So they might go through the motions, attend the parties, laugh along, but deep down there's a disconnect.
Yeah, their internal world and their external actions
Don't match.
don't match.
Wow. It makes you wonder how many people are feeling this way, but are just really good at hiding it.
Mhm.
Are there any other subtle signs that we should be aware of?
There are a couple more,
Okay.
but why don't we unpack those after a quick break
Okay, sounds good.
to give you a moment to process what we've covered so far.
Yeah, great idea.
Okay.
Let's take a break.
That's good.
Before the break, we were talking about those subtle signs
Yeah.
of high-functioning depression.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a couple more.
Yeah, right along with the exhaustion,
Okay.
the perfectionism, and the difficulty experiencing joy, we often see persistent anxiety and overthinking.
Oh, yeah, that constant worry.
Yes. The what ifs, replaying past mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, it's like your mind is stuck in overdrive.
Exactly. And it goes back to what Johann Hari found.
Okay.
He's a journalist and author who's written a lot about depression and anxiety. And he argues that these issues often stem from unresolved emotional pain,
Wow.
and a lack of genuine connection.
So even if someone seems to have a bustling social life, they could
Right.
still be struggling with feeling isolated.
Exactly. And Susan Cain, who wrote that book Quiet
Yeah,
about introversion,
right.
she makes a great distinction between being alone and feeling lonely.
Okay,
You can be at a party surrounded by people,
sure.
but still feel deeply lonely.
Yeah, if there's no real connection.
There's no real connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's a key element of high-functioning depression.
Okay.
This internal disconnect, even when outwardly things seem fine.
It's almost like wearing a mask,
Mhm.
pretending everything's okay when it's not. Why do you think this happens, though? Like,
Right.
why do people feel the need to hide their struggles?
I think a lot of it has to do with societal pressure.
Okay.
We live in a culture
Right.
that values productivity and achievement,
Hmm.
putting on a brave face.
Yeah.
If you're meeting your deadlines, hitting your goals,
Crushing.
looking the part, people just assume you're thriving.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case.
It's like that old fake it till you make it mentality.
Yes.
Taken to an extreme.
Taken to the extreme.
Yeah, but what's the cost of that?
Dr. Kelly McGonigal,
Okay.
who's a health psychologist, she wrote a book called The Upside of Stress.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and she talks about how chronic stress,
Right.
especially when hidden,
Okay.
can really wreak havoc
Uh-huh.
on our physical and mental well-being.
So it's not just about feeling bad.
No,
It can actually have really serious health consequences.
absolutely.
Oh gosh, this is making me rethink how I approach stress
Yeah.
and self-care for sure.
Important.
Yeah, but how do we start changing this?
I
How do
don't-
we break down the stigma?
It's a multifaceted challenge for sure,
Okay.
but it is possible.
Okay.
First, we need to cultivate self-awareness.
No.
Taking time to really check in with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
noticing our emotion,
Okay.
our behavior pattern.
Are we constantly exhausted?
Yeah, are we dreading social events even though we attend them?
Okay.
These can be signs that we need to take a step back
Mm-hmm.
and reevaluate.
It's like taking your mental temperature throughout the day.
Yes, exactly.
Just being more mindful of what's happening internally.
Exactly. And this awareness extends to how we treat others too. Are we quick to judge someone who seems off or not meeting our expectations?
Yeah,
Remember, we don't know what battles other people are fighting.
that's true.
So instead of judgment,
Mm-hmm.
let's try offering support and understanding.
It makes me think of that saying, be kind for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle.
Absolutely. And sometimes the simplest act of kindness, a listening ear,
Mm-hmm.
a genuine, how are you doing,
Right.
can make a world of difference.
So we've talked about like individual actions, but what about addressing this stigma on a larger scale?
Education is key.
Okay.
The more we learn about mental health,
Right.
the better equipped we are
To challenge those stereotypes.
to challenge those stereotypes, those
Yeah.
misconceptions.
It's like understanding that mental health is just as important as physical health.
Exactly. And when we normalize
Right.
talking about mental health,
Yeah.
seeking help becomes less of a taboo. Matt Haig, who's a writer,
Okay.
who's been very open about his own struggles with depression,
Mhm.
he said it perfectly.
Okay.
Talking about how you're feeling is not weak, it is human.
That's a great quote. Remember that.
Yeah.
But sometimes even knowing we need help taking that first step can feel really overwhelming.
It can.
What advice do you have for someone who's struggling but hesitant to reach out?
Start small.
Okay.
Talk to a trusted friend or family member.
Okay.
Research therapists in your area.
Hmm.
Explore online resources.
It's about finding what feels safe
Exactly.
and supportive for you.
You don't have to do this alone. There are people who care
Yeah.
and want to help.
But what about those of us who might not be struggling ourselves but want to help break down the stigma?
Yeah.
What can we do?
Sharing stories,
Okay.
both our own and those of others,
Right.
can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It helps normalize mental health challenges, create a sense of shared humanity.
Okay.
And remember, social media can be a double-edged sword.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Use it wisely. Connect with others, amplify positive messages,
Okay.
support mental health initiatives.
So it's about taking action on multiple levels
Exactly.
within ourselves,
Right.
our relationships, and our communities.
You got it.
And one of the most important things we can do
Yeah,
is shift our perspective on mental health.
absolutely.
Instead of viewing it as a weakness or a taboo topic,
Right.
let's start seeing it as part of the human experience
It's part of life.
and something we all navigate in our own way. We're all in this together.
We are.
So before the break, we were talking about moving beyond just awareness into action.
Yeah, taking action.
So what are some tangible steps our listeners can take to combat this mental health stigma?
Think about all those authors and researchers that we mentioned today.
Okay.
Dr. Corrigan, Dr. Rutherford Sapolsky, Brené Brown.
Yeah.
They've all written incredible books and articles packed with insights and strategies.
Okay.
Diving into their work is a great starting point.
It's like having a roadmap for understanding and navigating this whole world of mental health.
Exactly. And it's not just about reading.
Yeah.
It's about actively applying what you learn.
Okay, so like how would we do that?
Start by examining your own beliefs and biases.
Okay.
Have you ever caught yourself making a judgment about someone who's struggling with their mental health?
Yeah.
What assumptions did you make?
Okay.
It's about challenging those knee-jerk reactions and choosing empathy instead.
And remember, change starts with ourselves.
It does.
So the next time you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed, instead of pushing those feelings down, acknowledge them.
Acknowledge them. Practice self-compassion.
Okay.
Talk to a trusted friend, a therapist, or join a support group.
It's like we were saying earlier, it's okay not to be okay.
Exactly. And when you model that vulnerability, that self-acceptance, you create a ripple effect. You give other people permission to do the same.
And that can be really powerful for changing the conversation around mental health.
And don't underestimate the power of small actions.
Okay, like what?
Yeah, a simple check-in with a friend who seems down.
Yeah.
Sharing resources on social media, or even just listening without judgment. These things can make a huge difference.
It's about creating a culture of support and understanding one interaction at a time.
One interaction at a time.
This has been such an insightful deep dive.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
I feel like I've learned so much about mental health stigma.
Yeah.
But also about myself and how I can be a better advocate.
That's great to hear.
So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation?
Simply, each of us has the power to make a difference by choosing compassion over judgment, understanding over ignorance, and action over apathy. We can create a world where mental health is no longer stigmatized, but embraced as a vital part of the human experience.
That's a really powerful message. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope you leave feeling informed, empowered, and inspired to be part of the solution.
Until next time, be kind to yourselves and to each other.